Hey guys, welcome to video 93. I thought I'd take a little break from vacuum tube stuff for a couple of videos and talk about another class of semiconductor devices called thyristors. Now, thyristors are extremely nonlinear devices, and they're mainly used in the control of high power loads like motors, incandescent lamps, and heaters, stuff like that. And they're not very closely related to the topics we've been discussing like amplifiers and filters, but I was talking to a couple of people a few weeks ago, and the subject of color organs came up. And if you don't know what a color organ is, here's an example. And anyway, I thought that might be a kind of a cool topic to discuss here in this video series. So that's what we're going to do ultimately. But the college professor in me, I guess, couldn't let go of the idea of starting at the beginning and discussing how thyristors work before we get into the actual circuits. So that's where we are, and let's take a look at this device over here on the left. That's the original OG thyristor. It's called the 4-layer diode or trigger diode, sometimes called a Shockley diode after William Shockley, who invented the 4-layer diode back in the 50s. And don't confuse it with a Schottky diode. That's something else altogether that we may discuss in the future. And just as a point of interest, I happened to be out in Mountain View, California not too long ago, and I got this picture standing in front of the original location for Shockley Semiconductor Laboratories. This is considered the birthplace of the Silicon Valley, and right behind me here is a giant 4-layer diode, which I thought was kind of cool, so there you go. Now, if we come back to our topic at hand, we've got the internal structure for the 4-layer diode. Here is its schematic symbol, and if you orient it with the cathode up, conveniently it looks like the number 4. Now, just looking at the basic structure of a 4-layer diode, it doesn't seem like it would be useful for anything. But if the doping profiles in these different regions are modified just right, it turns out that it behaves like a PNP transistor connected to an NPN transistor, like I have shown here. And schematically, this is what it looks like. Now, just like a regular diode, the 4-layer diode is designed to carry current in one direction, that is down through the device from anode to cathode. And since neither of the bases of these transistors is connected to an external voltage or current source, both transistors are in cutoff, and the 4-layer diode is a normally off device. So to get it to do something interesting, we're going to make the anode positive with respect to the cathode. There should be no current flow, but we're going to have some leakage, and the leakage current through this PNP transistor acts as a base current to the NPN transistor. The base current gets amplified by a factor of beta and acts as a base current to the PNP transistor. Now, what we've got here is a positive feedback loop, but the leakage currents are small enough if this voltage is relatively low that neither of the transistors will turn on significantly. But if we increase the bias across the 4-layer diode, eventually the leakage current will increase to the point where we get sufficient feedback that both transistors will be driven very quickly into saturation. So once we reach the voltage required to cause this feedback loop to saturate both transistors, it becomes essentially a short circuit from anode to cathode. The bias voltage from anode to cathode required to cause these transistors to go into saturation is called the breakover voltage, and once they're in saturation, they remain in saturation until the current through the 4-layer diode is reduced below a certain level that's called the holding current. And the best way to understand this is to take a look at the characteristic curve. So let's go on over to the next page and do that. Okay, here's our 4-layer diode in a test circuit. We're going to be applying a variable input voltage and monitoring the anode current and anode to cathode voltage drop. So starting with Vin equals 0 volts, as we increase the voltage we get very little current flow through the diode. It's just leakage current until we hit the breakover voltage where the internal transistors saturate. Then the drop across the 4-layer diode decreases drastically and drops to what's called the valley voltage. From this point, if we keep increasing Vin, the current through the diode increases drastically. The slope of this curve is very steep here, so the internal dynamic resistance of the 4-layer diode is very low. Now, at this point, the 4-layer diode is going to remain latched into this low resistance mode unless we can decrease the anode current below what's called the holding current. If we do that, then the diode will quickly snap back into this high impedance state where we're operating on the relatively horizontal portion of the curve. Now, this graph doesn't tell us any information related to time, but the transition from high impedance to low impedance or low impedance to high impedance ideally should take 0 time. So this portion of the curve where we're transiting from here to here or here to here should be very, very fast, and we really can't operate on here. We can't set a cue point on there. That doesn't make any physical sense. This is a region of negative resistance. The 4-layer diode doesn't like this, and that's why it moves quickly from one mode to the other. Now let's talk about the diode parameters for a minute. Starting with the breakover voltage, it's going to be somewhere between 20 and 100 volts, but typically for the diodes that you'll be able to get a hold of today, it's either going to be 20 volts or maybe 25 to 32 volts, somewhere in that range. Now, usually the valley voltage isn't specified for this type of device, but rather they'll give you a value of delta VBO, that is the distance between the valley voltage and the breakover voltage, and it's usually greater than or equal to 5 volts. The holding current is typically going to be somewhere less than or equal to a milliamp. 4-layer diodes are relatively low power devices, so we're not going to be dealing with extremely high anode currents here, maybe into the tens or hundreds of milliamps at the most. Now, 4-layer diodes themselves are very limited in usefulness, and I don't even think they make them anymore, but you can still get them out there on places like eBay and so on. But they did lead to the creation of a really useful device that's called a silicon-controlled rectifier, or SCR, and that's what we're going to look at next. Over here on the left-hand side of the page, we've got the internal structure for the SCR, and you can see that it's basically the same as a 4-layer diode with the addition of a contact to this P region, and we call that the gate. And the main idea here is if we don't have any gate current injected into the device, the breakover voltage is the same as for any 4-layer diode with a similar construction. But if we inject some gate current, we're going to lower the breakover voltage, and basically the more gate current we inject, the lower the breakover voltage is going to be. So we've got a variable breakover voltage 4-layer diode, and we're calling it an SCR. Now here's the test circuit we'd use to generate the family of curves for this SCR. We start with Vin set to 0, VGK set to 0, and then we'd increase Vin and generate this bottom curve. We'd get breakover here at VBO 0, that is the breakover with 0 gate current, and then the SCR latches on and we're on to this low impedance mode of operation. If we decrease the anode current below the holding current, the SCR is going to snap back into its high impedance state, and we can start over again. This time Vin is set to 0, and we'd increase VGK to give us some gate current. Then as we increase Vin, we're going to find breakover occurs sooner, and again we can repeat this process with a little bit more gate current injected, and we get an even lower breakover voltage. Now, unlike 4-layer diodes, which are typically very low power devices, SCRs are usually high power devices, and they're available with breakover voltages ranging from usually 100 volts or so, up to over 1,000 volts, and they're capable of carrying currents ranging from a couple of amps to a couple of thousand amps. So let's go on over to the next page and take a look at a couple of typical SCRs. Starting on the left-hand side of the page, we've got the BT151, and we're going to be using this one in some applications later on. It's got a breakover voltage of 500 volts. It can handle a current of 7.5 amps, and the holding current is about 2 milliamps. It comes in a TO220 package, and these are pretty inexpensive devices. If you just do a search on the internet, you'll find we can get them for as little as 29 cents a piece. So these are really good for experimenting with. Now moving to the middle, we've got the VS50RIA120. It has a breakover voltage of 1200 volts, can carry 50 amps, and has a holding current of 200 milliamps. This one is in a stud package, which is a higher power package than the TO220. And these are a bit more expensive. If we do a web search and go to DigiKey, we see they're about $26 a piece. So they're pretty expensive, but you can get lower price SCRs in this package, but this is the first one I happened to grab. Now coming over here to the T501N, this is a really high power SCR. It's got a VBO of 7,000 volts, can carry 890 amps, and has a holding current of about 350 milliamps. It comes in this hockey puck package, and these are typically used in really high power industrial applications like steel mills to control large electric motors and so on. And these are real expensive. If we go on over to see what DigiKey is selling these for, they're about $1,000 a piece. So yeah, they're pretty expensive, but it just goes to show that SCRs are available in a very wide range of packages, power handling capabilities, and prices. Now what we're going to do next is take a look at a bidirectional trigger diode, and that is a device called a DIAC. Up here we've got the two most common symbols you're going to see that represent the bidirectional trigger diode, which I'm just going to call a DIAC from now on. It's much easier to say. Normally you're going to see this symbol on the right more often than this other one. The two terminals are called main terminal 1 and main terminal 2, and functionally a DIAC is equivalent to two inverse parallel connected 4-layer diodes, and this allows us to operate in both the first quadrant and the third quadrants. And we could generate these curves with our test circuit. We just drive V in positive to generate the curve in the first quadrant, and we drive V in negative to generate the curve in the third quadrant. And this leads us right into the next device we're going to talk about, which is called a TRIAC. The schematic symbol for the TRIAC is shown over here, and it looks just like the symbol for a DIAC, except we've added an extra gate lead. Functionally, it's equivalent to two inverse parallel connected SCRs, which gives us operation in the first and third quadrants. Now the test circuit down here could be used to generate these curves. If we start with VG equals 0 and increase V in the positive direction, we'll generate this curve on the right with the maximum breakover voltage. And if we inject positive current into the gate, we will decrease the breakover voltage in proportion to the amount of current injected. Now if we drive V in negative and we apply a negative gate current, that is a negative voltage applied to the gate, we'll generate the curves over here in the third quadrant. And the advantage of the TRIAC over the SCR is obviously that we can work with both positive and negative going input signals, so it gives us a wider range of control over load current. Now for both TRIACs and SCRs there are thousands of devices out there to pick from. So if we take a quick look at Mauser's webpage for a second and search under Triacs, we see we get over 2,000 results. And if I just come down to the first one in the list here, it's a TO220 package Triac rated at 400 volts and 10 amps. And these are a little less than $3 a piece. And the next one down on the list is in a larger package, obviously a much higher power device. It's rated at 40 amps and 600 volts. These are $13 a piece, and so on. We could go on through the list. We've got here one in a dip package. It's probably an opto isolator of some sort, but we're not going to get into that today. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that there's a wide variety of these devices out there. Now what we're going to do next is wrap things up, and we're going to look at one last thyristor and another related device. The final thyristor we'll look at is called a Quadrac, and is just a Triac with a built-in DIAC as shown here in the symbol. Now I haven't discussed the reason why we'd want to put a trigger diode in series with the gate, but we'll get to that in the next video. But for right now, this is the Quadrac, and down here is a picture of a Quadrac I had laying around. It's in a rather unusual package, and I don't even know if you can get these anymore, but here's an example of a Quadrac. Now the final device we're going to look at is the unijunction transistor, or UJT. Unijunction transistors aren't thyristors themselves, but they're usually used in conjunction with thyristors in triggering circuits. As you can see, the UJT has two base terminals and an emitter terminal, and it does have one PN junction. That's why it's called a unijunction transistor. Now, the characteristic curve for the UJT is kind of odd looking. It's normally rotated 90 degrees so that the voltage axis is vertical and the emitter current axis is horizontal. But the main thing that we'll see here is that it does exhibit negative resistance, and that means we can use it to create an oscillator circuit. And over here is a typical UJT circuit. We're going to get this kind of sawtooth waveform here at the emitter. The base 2 terminal is going to produce these negative going pulses from a DC level, and the base 1 terminal will generally produce positive going spikes, and these signals can be used to trigger thyristors. And I'm not going to go deep into the details of the UJT now, but I just wanted to show it to you. And you can look it up online and find out some more information about it if you want to. But that's it for today's video. Next time around, we're going to build and analyze some thyristor based circuits, and we're going to get to the color organ, and I think that'll be kind of cool and interesting. So that's it for today, and I'll see you guys next time around.